Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for September 20th, 2016. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Today I'm joined here with Joe Harten. Welcome, Joe.
Hi. Glad
to have you back. Yeah, and for folks that aren't familiar, Joe actually leads the engineering team that helps to develop our threat analysis platform. And it's good that you have insights from developing the platform, but also into the security activities that need to be protected.
Right, we try to look at it from both angles.
Absolutely. And we have online John Markley. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
And John, I think it's been some time since we've sort of introduced your role. You're involved in, I think, predominantly analyzing the activities that might impact mobile devices. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. Mobile endpoint security is what we call my role, and it's really just looking at threats and vulnerabilities associated with those handsets we all know and love.
All right, and thank you for being here today. We'll talk a little bit about some of the advancements in mobility as well as some of the challenges, I'm sure. I'm Brian Rexroad, and so let's get into the program. First of all, John, your opportunity here, I guess, everybody's kind of downloading the new Apple iOS 10. And I know my daughter was pretty excited because you get to have animated emojis, but I don't think that's the key feature of this release. Can you tell us a little about it?
Sure, yes. Stickers are really exciting for a lot of people. I'm not quite sure why. I guess I'm in the wrong generation. But the Apple, of course, had their announcement a couple weeks ago, and they talked about their new, devices coming out, like the iPhone 7, the 7 Plus. And a number of other things. And one of the things that we've been expecting for some time is a new Apple iOS release, this version 10. So, they finally got it published and distributed, and it was available for update. I just got to mention that from a security perspective, that 10 release had a number of things, including the updated patches for the Pegasus Trident vulnerability that was fixed in 9.3.5. So they did push that out and get you all updated with that for the 10.01 release.
Now tell us a little bit about the Pegasus Trident vulnerability.
This was the issue. I'm sure it was covered in previous programs, but it was essentially that there was a reporter who had indicated that somebody had pushed him an SMS push, a text, and he said if he were to click on that, then he would get his device what they call quasi-rooted. So it actually put some malware on there, and then it could actually do a little spying on his device.
Yeah, so that was a case where I think it had to do with a WebKit vulnerability or something along those lines. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. There were three 0-day vulnerabilities that were kind of linked together. One was a JavaScript, one was a Safari, and one was I'm trying to remember that one was actually a rooting type vulnerability. And those three vulnerabilities in a sequence was what would have compromised his device if he had gone through with it.
So that was patched in iOS 9.3 something, 3.5, right? And also is included as a patch, or basically as a part of the iOS 10 release, correct?
Correct. So as soon as you loaded 10, you immediately jumped to 10.01, which had the final part of that patch.
All right, very good. So it's good to know that the serious vulnerabilities are patched, and we're moving on. Okay, very good. All right, thanks for the update, John. And Joe, let's go to you. And there's a lot of activity around smart cities, and I think a lot of interest in being able to make our cities more efficient, make it possible to be able to move around our cities more efficiently. So,
right, it's a real opportunity for cities to take advantage of some of the new technologies that we have. Unfortunately, it's also a potential for vulnerability and exploit. So this story I picked up on is from SecureList, and they basically looked at smart terminals associated with smart cities. So parking meters, bike rental kiosks, movie ticket terminals, even, it's rare, but some cities with public restrooms have smart meters on the public restrooms. So, they're not your average IoT device, but they have some of the same characteristics. They're always on. They handle user and payment data, which is sensitive. They're always connected to each other and to the internet and, kind of back home dial home for transactions. But really, these are PCs with touchscreens. So they're, they have a lot of the same potential for vulnerability. The difference really is that they're basically in full screen mode all the time. So the story sort of went through how a potential hacker or someone trying to exploit these devices could compromise them by getting out of full screen
Trying
mode.
to escape out of the full screen mode, get into
Exactly.
Windows mode, maybe put up a shell and be able to start.
Yeah, either a
manipulating.
keyboard, the help window, command line, shell, like you said. But the first method they call is tap fuzzing, which is basically you tap and hold on different parts of the screen, usually the corners, and try to sort of force the terminal to exit full screen mode and get access to the keyboard or the command line. Another method is data fuzzing. Basically, it's entering inappropriate, incorrect strings into the input forms, and that has potentially the same ability to get to a control panel or a keyboard. Also, sometimes there's external links that you can get to from like a help menu. There was a mention of one of the systems you could actually get out to Facebook, and then once you're external, bring up a web browser, then you can do anything from there. Those kinds of tactics. I think one thing we talked about, it's important to mention here, is that these aren't, while they have a lot of the characteristics of IoT devices, there should be a layer of oversight and control on these smart cities. So, they're being implemented at the city level or at some sort of entity, and there should be some security layer on top. So it's not really personal. These aren't personal devices. Either it's a bike rental company or the city municipal parking authority. There should be some entity controlling the security on these devices. So, it does provide an opportunity for some fixes on these things that we would hope to see, some controls over the ability to lock down these devices.
So this isn't necessarily saying that there are existing vulnerabilities in deployed stuff. It's a case where these are things that could happen and may in fact exist in some example tests that they've done.
Right, and they may have been in beta or pre-release where someone got a look at them. So you're right, it's not necessarily existing issues with these devices.
But it's good to point out, I guess there are two aspects here. One is that cities that are involved in doing automation in the city systems really need to be thinking about the security aspects.
Absolutely.
And it's not just the network security, it's the user interface security.
Right.
And as you pointed out, these are computers with a specialized interface, and you need to be able to make sure that control of that interface is well tested. And then I think the other aspect is, and of course cities have the opportunity to solicit services to help with that, to be able to put together the packages for them. And I would say perhaps the other sort of angle on this isn't necessarily a smart city specific thing.
Right.
It's really devices are being, take a look at registers associated with retail outlets. Those are again PCs, they have a specialized interface. If there is any chance that interface is unattended, and somebody else might have the opportunity to do something with that without, that you don't trust, then there would be the similar kind of concern. I think that's one of the immutable, security principles. I've forgotten the exact name of it, but Microsoft had a thing that basically if you allow somebody access to your computer, then they own that computer.
Right.
This is not quite that, because presumably the computer is in a protected enclosure. You're only granting access to the things that you trust. It's important.
And while it is internet access, like you said, presumably it's controlled access, and there's some level of oversight as to what these devices can actually get to. So
ATMs would fit into the same category.
Absolutely.
And in fact, they probably have some pretty robust testing around that.
We've
because
seen
I can
plenty of
imagine,
exploits on ATMs, haven't we?
but they've also been pretty well, pretty well put together. As Brian Krebs probably has the best inventory of articles on that topic for anybody that's interested, but this really kind of fits in that same category. That is, if you're going to have an unintended kiosk, and I think that's really sort of the theme here, any unattended kiosk where perhaps malicious actors might be trying to access the interface, we'll have to be paying attention to what kinds of things they might want to do. And we didn't even get into the notion of physically trying to get into these places. Maybe they'll just poke a hole through the screen and reach in there and do something. So
yeah,
how many of these devices have USB ports in the side of them too, right?
Right. Absolutely. So this is, I think this article brings to light some very important considerations.
Yeah, we'll probably see more on
beyond
smart cities moving forward. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for bringing that. So, John, let's go to you, and I think you have a quiz for us to grapple with.
So you usually have a quiz of some kind. This one's a little easier or harder depending upon how how well your memory is. One of the things I got to thinking about as a quiz is we use a lot of acronyms in normal conversation, especially in the cybersecurity world. And usually we choose acronyms that we can speak, as words, but not necessarily do we always understand where do those acronyms come from. What do they really mean? So I thought, okay, I'll give a little bit of acronyms that I know I see almost every day, and let's see, let's see how well we do. I think you guys will get this pretty easy, but if you don't, then I'm sorry, I stumped you. I didn't mean to make you look foolish. Anyway, 3 DES or triple DES is the first one. This one I think will be easy. A, triple data encryption algorithm, or B, 3 distinct encrypted sequences.
What do you think, Joe?
I think B, 3 distinct encryption sequences.
Yeah. You know what? I think both of these are wrong.
Oh, they're both wrong.
Well, if it were actually 3 DEA, that might fit. But DEA is already taken by the Drug Enforcement Agency. So to disambiguate the acronyms here, I think 3 DES is really triple data encryption standard.
Correct. It's a little bit of a trick. Just the first one is probably closer because 3 DEA is actually what a lot of people call triple DES.
Yeah. Oh, really?
But it doesn't say, doesn't trip off the tongue, right?
Right. So perhaps what is the sort of the little trick here is each of those encryption steps would have a unique key, or to basically put it together, it's one long key. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, I believe that the middle one, that is the first encryption, I think the second one actually is a decryption, and then the third is an encryption. Is that consistent with your understanding, John?
I think that sounds right to me too, Brian. I'm not much of I'm not a cryptographer real well, but that does sound very, very familiar to me.
Yeah, it's a little counterintuitive. I think it's just to give it a little bit of variation in the activity. So, all right. How about the next one?
I'll give you the second one, MD5, is either A, methodized decryption, 5th version, or B, message digest, 5th version.
What do you think, Joe?
I don't know. I got the first one wrong. I'm going to keep quiet on this one.
Okay. All right. Well, I happen to know that MD5 isn't used for decryption. It's used for creating basically a signature. And so it's basically taking a bunch of data and digesting it down to, I think it's a 60, is it a 64? But I guess it's a 128.
128, yeah.
Bit sequence at this point. So it's really just to create something that's, you can do it forward. You can take a piece of data and generate an MD5 signature. It's really, really hard to take an MD5 signature and figure out what data is needed to create that signature. Really, really hard.
So B?
It's B, yes.
Yes, B.
All right.
All right. Well, maybe these will be a little easier. We'll go a little faster.
But did it sound like I was trying to avoid answering the question there?
All right. Here's one for you. A, challenge handshake authentication protocol, or B, challenge access protocol?
Brian?
It's got to be challenge access protocol.
No, it's not.
Oh, really? So, Shame on me. I should know the answer to this. So, tell us a little more about it, John.
So you have, if you think back to the old standards of networking to do, it's kind of an encryption kind of takeoff still, but you have CHAP and PAP. PAP, I think it's proxy authentication or authentication protocol. So you have these mechanisms that allow the trusted relationship between 2 points on a network, and CHAP is one of those, especially like in a VPN world or an IPsec type world.
Very good. And by the way, for our viewing audience here, John gives us the questions. He doesn't give us the answers ahead of time. And by definition, we're really not allowed to research it. So, it'd be pretty easy to figure this out if we did a lookup on it. But this is real life.
The goal is to embarrass us, I think.
So I'm stumping you more than I thought I would. Okay, that's good.
Okay. That's good.
All right, radius maybe. Here we get networking. A, remote authentication dial-in user service. Or B, restricted access, denial and usage service.
I think Radius is remote authentication from what I remember. So I would go with A on this one.
Yeah, I would tend to go with A as well, because something about denial and usage service just doesn't sound like what you're looking for here.
And then here it comes, right? What's the correct answer?
You got it right. Yay!
It's kind of funny that we still use. I guess we still say dial the phone.
Yeah.
And it's even though I doubt that Radius is used in any kind of a dial-in service these days, but it's it should be truncated. It should be remote authentication access or something like that. So. Alrighty, so next question here.
Well, last two, we got to get mobile. I am a mobile guy, right? So I got to give you two mobile ones. We use these now. These I hear a lot. So these are two ones that certainly I don't expect everybody to know, but I know in my day-to-day I use it a lot. SIM, A, service into mobile, or B, subscriber identity module.
I like B on this one. Subscriber identity module.
Yeah, I like B as well, because it kind of comes as a little module.
Yeah.
And you jam it in the device. Right.
Bingo? Nice.
Yeah.
Yep, bingo. And that's exactly right. You think about a SIM chip that goes in your phone. That's what SIM actually stands for.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
All right. Then the last one, maybe a little tricky. MZ, which we talk about lately. With some of the security stuff for a lot of people are going to LTE over 2G because of concerns over eavesdropping and whatnot. We use the word MZ a lot. And so A, international mobile subscriber identity, or B, internal mobility sequencing interface.
Is it international, Brian? I don't think it's international, is it? Wouldn't it be more internal? What do you think?
Well, I'm a little biased here.
You know this one.
And it is definitely internal.
Yeah.
But I think the key word here is sequencing. I'm not sure where the sequencing would come from. If there were actually a notion of rolling.
Oh, you're right. It's more of and it's more of an identity than an interface too. All right, I'll go with you then. A.
Yeah, I tend to think of MZ as sort of a MAC address for mobile devices. And it is unique internationally, because if you want to be able to provide roaming services internationally, you want to be able to uniquely identify devices internationally. So I'm going to go with international mobile subscriber identity.
And you got it right, guys. And in a way you said it, Brian, was exactly correct. You want to think of MZ like you would to a MAC address on an Ethernet card. Mm-hmm. Unique, it is identifier, and it is what says on the SIM, it's associated with your phone. It's in that combination between SIM and the MZ that's actually in the device. You have a very strong sense of identity in that device that's unique to you. And so when we talk about falsifying or trying to masquerade as somebody, these are the things that you have to duplicate. Mm-hmm.
Well, and in fact, I think as MAC addresses are assigned to manufacturers, I think blocks of MCs are assigned to manufacturers as well. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
You can tell if you know enough about something, you could tell who made that device by the MC.
Perhaps not the specific model number, but you can certainly identify who manufactured it. Right? Cool.
All right.
Well, thank you for that quiz. That's always, I think, the diversity of what you bring to the table here, John, I think is part of really what makes that quiz valuable, is that we get to explore some new areas on the program in doing that. So let's take a look at the internet weather for the last week or so here. And first and foremost on the list is our top 10 most probed ports. That's obviously a standard part of the program. This is from yesterday, September 19th, 2016. We show a really large proportion of activity on port 23 TCP. We're going to take a little closer look at that. It's followed by port 22 TCP. We're not going to take a closer look at that one, however. I think that's kind of on par with what we've been seeing pretty much recently. 3389 TCP after that, 43 TCP, 1911. I think that's a little bit higher than we typically see in terms of the number of probes, but it generally is associated with researchers doing that probing activity. Generally, what I would put in the category of somewhat innocuous. Port 80 TCP, 443 and port 80 are often getting probed. In fact, there's a reasonable amount of botnet activity doing the probing on anything web. As you might expect, looking for vulnerabilities, SQL injection attacks, cross-site scripting attacks. There are opportunities for that is. And then we have 53413. That's the backdoor associated with Netis home routers, building botnet activity around that. And then followed by port 21 TCP. We are going to take a look at that one because, actually not in terms of probes, but in terms of the number of sources a little bit later on. A little bit of interesting information on that one. And then followed by port 53 UDP, that's probing around for DNS servers. And then looking at the most sources doing the probing, this one, I thought we had seen the top of it before, but it keeps going up and up. So port 23 taking up about 80% of the pie chart here. That's really significant, and I think this is a new record, at least from what I have seen. I haven't actually gone through all the data to figure it out, but through the course of an entire day on aggregate, we saw in excess of 1.6 million unique addresses, is actually closer to 1.7 million unique addresses, just probing on port 23. So a significant amount of activity there, followed by a mere sliver in the pie on port 2323 TCP, but we are going to take a little closer look at that one as well, because it has an interesting geographic demographic associated with it. That's not even redundant, but it sounds like a really redundant phrase, geographic demographic. Followed by 445 TCP. We have a few ICMP ports that are being probed there. 80 TCP is in the mix, and as I mentioned earlier, we're going to take a little bit of closer look at port 21 TCP associated with activity. And I think in last week's report, they reported on 4028 TCP, which was showing some somewhat anomalous activity. So taking a look at port 23, this is looking at the last year of activity. It helped to provide a little bit of perspective. Now keep in mind, even though when we look at a full year ago, we still had a significant amount of probing activity. That is, this activity to recruit new devices, predominantly these closed circuit television DVRs into these botnets. That's been going on for more than a year now, but it really has kicked up over the last 6 months or so and continues to go upward. Again, seeing new records in terms of the number of probes in a given hour, as well as the number of sources in a given hour, up on the order of about really close, just short of 450,000 unique sources in an hour. And as we said earlier, 1.6, actually closer to 1.7 million unique sources in a given day. And Joe, I think you had just seen an article where they were talking about 1 million devices in this botnet, and it's easily approaching twice that many.
Well, 1 million just in that one family, the Bashlight family, that's doing mostly DDoS.
Well, and this is in fact, I think, really a big part of that family. That is, you see the dips in the graph here.
Yeah.
As those dips go down, that's a strong indication that it's really just one botnet that's associated with those dips in activity. Otherwise, it would kind of level itself out. So it is likely that family of botnets. It has several names associated with it. There are lots of articles that have been coming out recently, and as you pointed out, they are used predominantly for denial of service attacks.
Right.
And I think we're going to have some additional discussion about that a little bit later in the next program. Next item here is scam probes and sources on port 2323 TCP, and I think this was first reported last week when it sort of popped up on our radar. We're just showing 30 days of data here, and it is, again, lots of IoT devices that are participating in this activity. And, I think it's interesting, probably was pointed out last week, that you can see that there was some probing activity that took place, a couple of events. And this is fairly typical when we see a new port that's being probed. That is, we don't see any increase in the number of sources. So it's just one or two sources. They go out and probe, see if there are any hits, and decide whether or not they want to do it on a more grand scale. And certainly what's happened here is that they basically employed a botnet, used a lot of source addresses to create lots more probes on a broader scale, and that has sort of tapered down significantly since we saw that start. But the other thing I sort of wanted to point out is that since the report last week, I think we had reported on the order of, I'm going to say, around 50,000 sources. It's actually, perhaps it was a little bit less than that. But that did spike up significantly since then, and since it's tapered off. So I don't think we're done with this one. Apparently there are some hits on these devices, and they're being recruited into perhaps a different botnet, perhaps part of the botnet that we were just talking about. It's not clear at this point. Similar types of devices that we're seeing. The other thing I wanted to share with you on this one is the geographic heat map associated with this. Obviously, we're looking on the order of about 7,000 unique devices that have been doing this scanning activity. And we see really heavy activity in about the center of Europe here, really heavy activity in Eastern China, in Vietnam, the Philippines, really heavy activity in South America, not so much from the United States. I mean, there are some certainly in the United States, but relatively speaking, if you look at the computer population, the technology population, you tend to see really heavy density in the United States, comparatively speaking. This is the exact opposite. I don't think that happened by accident. I think there's something that's driving this. For some reason, they chose to perform the probing activity from outside the United States. I don't know if that probing activity was directed more toward the United States or if there were other things in mind, but nevertheless, that is what it looks like geographically. And the last item I wanted to share with you here today is an increase in the number of bytes on port 16393 UDP. This one, just doing a little bit of research, there was actually an Apple support article that indicates that if you want to operate FaceTime through a firewall, you need to open certain ports, and port 16393 is basically the beginning of a range of ports that I presume are dynamically assigned for FaceTime sessions. So I suspect that this is associated with FaceTime. We're seeing an increase in activity, perhaps not by coincidence. This activity started to increase right around September 14th. And John, I think you had indicated that iOS 10, Apple iOS 10 was just released on September 13th. Is that correct?
That is correct. So that's certainly a very non-coincidental looking draft.
So the good news behind this is this appears to be innocuous activity. It's a very widely distributed. It doesn't have the indicators of malicious activity. So if you do see an increase of this type on your network, I wouldn't be too worried about it. It may, in fact, just be associated with FaceTime activity. I apologize, that was not the last item. One last item here, sources on port 21 TCP that's associated with FTP. That's actually the control channel for FTP, so it would be the login prompt for doing an FTP session. Looking at 30 days here, and we did see an increase in the number of sources that are probing on this port. So it went from, a typical average of about 500 sources doing that probing, jumped up closer to, peaking out around 3,000 sources. So it's not a huge botnet, but certainly an increase in the amount of activity. And it does indicate botnet because of the number of sources that are participating here. Generally speaking, if somebody were doing research, they might have 100 servers. I doubt that they would have a 3,000 servers or so. So I would treat this as more highly suspect, if not malicious in nature. And if you have FTP servers out there, there was actually recently an article describing how a number of FTP servers are not very well secured, and somebody had done some research and was able to compromise a number of them, even some that were associated with the government. So that's something that you'll want to be paying attention to help make sure that your FTP servers, if you have any, are well protected. So that's our show for today. We'd like to thank you for joining us. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at attThreatTraq@list.att.com, and you can find AT&T ThreatTraq on the AT&T Tech channel. It's on YouTube as well as in an audio podcast on iTunes. You can follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @ATTBusiness. And I'd like to thank you, Joe, and thank you, John, for joining today. I'm Brian Rexroad. We'll be back next week with a new episode, and until then, keep your network safe.